Thank you, Derek. And what we're going to do right now is just inject a little bit of on-the-ground reality into the discussion, because we've been hearing a lot about policy, prescriptions from people who live far away, haven't spent as much time as these two women have in the region. Let's see, I'm trying not to do the deep breathing thing on the microphone to you all. So I want to introduce Dr. Nada Mohammed Ibraheem Al-Jubori. She is a former member of the Iraqi Council of Representatives and the head of Iraqi Women and Future organization. She's also a member of the Reconciliation Committee in Baghdad. And also, you have seen her before on the stage, Nancy Lindborg, the president of the United States Institute of Peace. So let's start with that first question. Give us a snapshot. Nada, what is it like on the streets of Baghdad today?
Thank you. Actually, now I think most of you, they know there is a lot of chaos in Baghdad, and there is a lot of demonstration in the streets everywhere around the Green Zone, which is the residential place for the Iraqi government and the parliament. And those demonstrations have been run by al-Sadrists, asking for real reconciliation. But this is, you can see on TV, and if you go to Baghdad, maybe you cannot walk from one area to one area. And every now and then there is maybe one explosion. And also there is kidnapping and disappearing of some of the figures, of the social figures. So more or less it is unstable and fragile political process as a whole.
So when you leave your house, do you have a bodyguard? Do you think about your security? Do you look to the end of the block to see if you see someone suspicious? How do you travel around?
No, for me, I travel around with one body only. Since the beginning in my work as a politician, I used to be like this because I cannot think about it actually. When I think about it, that means I'm not gonna leave my house in the morning, so I never think about it. Maybe sometimes I pray and leave the house because it's very difficult to think about it. That means you are not going to do anything. So it's better not to think because you don't know who is the enemy and you don't know who is the friend.
So
this is the problem.
Rather than let fear freeze you in place, you just know the dangers out there and do it anyway.
Yes, you know, but there was sometimes we had some stability for a while in Baghdad. But it doesn't mean stability in Baghdad that I'm going to stop thinking about Anbar and Salahuddin and Mosul, who I'm receiving a lot of calls and requests, and I meet the displaced people maybe every other day, everywhere. So it doesn't mean you will feel, even if it's some sort of stability by the army, but that doesn't mean that you feel comfortable from inside.
Now, Nancy, you first went there back in 2003 when we could all walk around for a brief time. And your most recent trip was last October. What have you seen in your snapshots?
Well, I would focus first and foremost on the big positive change that I've seen, just to inject a little positivity. And when I was there last fall, one of the things I did was attend a conference of NGOs in Erbil, where there were about 250 organizations represented, and organizations like Mrs. Al-Jubori's. And I think this is an extreme change that we need to understand and celebrate, that there has been this growing of very active civil society organizations. When I was there were street demonstrations happening in most of the major cities, and it was not demonstrations for sectarian purposes, but rather demand for better governance and for reform. And so the previous panel talked a lot about the costs of state building. And what I would say is the need to shift the focus from just state building to state building and peace building. And peace building is what has not yet happened in Iraq. And there's a lot of conversation at many levels among all of the various groups in Iraq of now's the time for national reconciliation, which is very difficult to do, but necessary in the long term. And the issue is, how do you build reconciliation at the national level, but how do you also do it from the community level up?
Now, that segues nicely into our next contentious topic, which is the Shiite versus Sunni divide. I remember back in 2003, when I worked at CBS News, one of our engineers had been a pilot in Saddam's Air Force. Mm-hmm. And he said that his fellow pilots in a list were being knocked off by Shiite assassins. Mm-hmm. He was afraid to leave the bureau. He would take 3 taxis to get home. He only visited his family once a week. Yet after the Shiite shrine, the Golden Mosque of Samarra, was hit by presumably Al-Qaeda of Iraq, there was a resurgence of anti-Sunni Shiite militia-led violence on the streets. And U.S. military officials would tell me of finding up to 100 bodies of Sunnis every day in the streets who'd been taken away and tortured to death and then dumped. Horrible bloodletting on both sides. So does Iraq need some sort of national reconciliation committee? And you know, before I even get to that, I should ask, do you identify as Sunni or Shiite? Do you think of yourself or your friends that way?
You know, actually, I am Iraqi. I don't identify myself as a Sunni or a Shi'i. And originally, I am a doctor, a physician doctor, so I cannot think about this in this way. I will lobby for Sunni because they are discriminated and displaced. And I will lobby for Shi'i because they are living miserable life with very bad infrastructure in the south of Iraq. And I think the Iraqi, they deserve to have a national government. About reconciliation, I was working in this issue for years now. Since I was in the Parliament, I was in the Committee of 5, and it was from my request as a woman to be in this committee. By the end of the day now, let's say, there is no real will, political will, for this issue. In spite of all what's happening in the country, and the model of reconciliation, I found it's not real, because each dominating party want to implement the things that it serve that party in this reconciliation model. So this is not a reconciliation, you know that. Until this moment, all the violence happening inside the country. I remember at the time when first reconciliation committee I was, they give us the chance to meet the people who are released from prisons, who they didn't get their trial for 5 or 4 years. That means they are innocent. And that at the time I meet those people, I found how much bad things happen in my country. I think we need to relook on the constitution of the country, to reconstruct the constitution about this issue. We have to putting a government who are behaving non-sectarian. We need to do a lot of real things to give the rights for the people. For instance, what about the demonstrator in Anbar when they started demonstration? Why is nobody listen to their requests?
And that's, of course, when they were demonstrating against the existing government at the time, saying that they weren't getting rights, they weren't getting a part of the political power and a role in their own decision making.
And any reconciliation, there should be a will, and they should change the legislation in the country about Iraq, about accountability and justice, about the law of terrorism, and you need amnesty. Without amnesty, you can't do anything.
Amnesty for people who might have joined a militant group during a time of protest, or?
No, we need a real amnesty. We cannot, after eradication of ISIS, we need that, because that means without it, that means the killing will continue in the area. for sectarian reasons, for other reasons. It's a big issue, and I don't think there is time to talk about that now.
Well-
But without it, if there is no mercy and there is no amnesty, that means they will kill each other for life.
Now that leads into your work, because you
Yeah.
have been at the U.S. Institute for Peace trying to forge some of these bonds on the ground.
Well, I would agree that there's a need for the national reconciliation process, but it's very difficult right now given the political parties. At the local level, it's essential, and it has to be a very focused, well-resourced companion to the military action that's underway. So as Daesh is cleared out of various parts of Iraq, what is left behind are communities that are filled with suspicion and mistrust because of the terrible things that have happened under Daesh. And just to give a specific example, in the city, into Crete, as Daesh came in, they killed 1,700 Army cadets who were in a place called Camp Spiker, most of whom were Sunni. And that left enormous amounts of resentment and hatred between the Shia families who lost a member and the Sunni families who mainly lived in the area.
Oh, you mean most of them were Sunni or most of them were Shia?
The killed
those killed?
members of the Iraqi army were mainly Shia.
Oh, okay.
The Daesh members who came in were mainly Sunni. And so it exacerbated all kinds of hatred and mistrust between the existing people who lived there. Many Sunni families fled for fear of their lives. And so after Daesh was cleared, you can't just assume everyone will resume their lives. There's enormous hatred, resentment, mistrust, lots of bad information. So since 2004, USIP has worked with a group of Iraqis to train, support, and develop a network of facilitators. And one very remarkable man, Abdul Aziz, who is from Mosul, who's been a negotiator, facilitator working with us since 2004, he himself had about an hour to get his family out of Mosul before Daesh swept in and ransacked everything. So he and the other facilitators started mapping out who were the stakeholders into Crete, who were the tribal leaders, who were affected, who were not affected, and spent about 8 months conducting a negotiation between the Shia and Sunni leaders, including they were all together in a Baghdad hotel when it was bombed, but they continued on with the dialogue. And the result was that they created an MOU for not going into tribal retribution, not going into the kind of bloodletting that could have happened and continued the cycle of violence. They then began working with the local officials to ensure that those who were accused went to the justice system instead of going into tribal justice. And the result is that they've created an opportunity for families to return. So more than 100,000 families have now returned to Crete. And in a country that has over 3 million displaced people, this is what we need to do at a local level. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of focused effort. We're working with the National Reconciliation Committee to do the same preparation for when Daesh is moved out of Ramadi and then in Mosul. And this will take a very long time. I would note it is highly under-resourced. So as we the coalition and the international community put a lot of money into the military action, we are under-resourcing the political and reconciliation strategy that has to go hand in hand.
And yet it sounds like from some of the conversations throughout the forum that this is more genuine and respected on the ground in that it is not the U.S. government providing this, or it's not seen to be the U.S. government providing this assistance for reconciliation, that you're seen as a nonprofit that doesn't have government ties.
Well, it is local organizations that are now run by these Iraqi facilitators, and they have created linkages with the Iraqi National Reconciliation Committee, which has very little resource and capacity. So it is an Iraqi-driven initiative, which is what it must be for the long-term sustaining success.
Well, the committee, having some help from the United Nations in Baghdad, but let me tell you something. There will be no reconciliation with this committee. This is one. The other things...
With the Iraqi government committee?
Yes, yes, with this committee.
At a national level.
At the national level. This is one. The second things about Daesh, ISIS, and Spiker. I want to say something here to the audience. Why should be a base in Salah ad-Din Tikrit with 1,800 young boy, all Shi'i, putting in one base as a soldiers? Is this sectarian behavior from the government? Soldiers should be mixed, Sunni, Shi'i, Christian, Muslim. Why? At the moment, Daesh came and killed them all. All are youngs.
So you believe that that's a military policy to ethnically divide different units?
That means a military governmental policy. This is one. The second things, do you know how many people have been killed, Sunni people in Anbar and Salah ad-Din and Mosul, women, children, men, by ISIS, and all are Sunni, of course, those people. And in spite of that, let me tell you something. There is 4 million displaced in a miserable situation in a tent, and they are Sunni, and 3 million trapped inside those governorates, and they are Sunni also. So this is all happen as a consequences of a government who couldn't put policies and strategy for their country. If we consider this an Iraqi issue, internal issue, this is one. The second thing, I have been for doing like 100 meetings with the leaders, then go and make another 100 meetings on different levels for this reconciliation issue. I cannot find the will, and I read all the models who have been written. No one of it you can implement it for the country as a whole country and giving the rights. As long as we are thinking of revenge, as long as there's thinking of sectarian thinking, as long as we are putting religion and sex and race inside our brains, and we are supposed to be a model of reconciliation, and we are leaders of reconciliation, so that means there will be no reconciliation in the country.
So it sounds like you're saying there needs to continue to be pressure from the outside and support from organizations like Nancy's to make this possible.
I need pressure from outside. Many institutes like Peace Institute, like EU, and I think the international community and United States of America also, as a coalition forces, who is targeting ISIS in Iraq, they should play another role also, and they should start this now. Not only, I know without the coalition forces, I'm not in my house. That means ISIS in Baghdad, and it will be more chaos. By coalition forces who are targeting those terrorists, we are still safe. But at the same time, they should implement another program and another strategy and help the people to be on the safe side in the country.
So I'd like to broaden this conversation out in the 10 minutes we have left. If you have questions, please raise your hand, or alternately, you can send them through the app, and they're going to post them on the screen. So while we wait for them to think about how to interrogate us, could you, let's broaden the discussion out a little bit in that, Nancy, you said that your program isn't just focused on Iraq, that you've also looked at other areas where terrorism has plagued the communities.
So we work in probably about 20 conflict-affected countries around the world, and what is common is all of them would rank very high on any index of fragility. And that is measured in terms of illegitimacy of the government, inability to keep their citizens secure, to provide services. And Iraq is really a microcosm of that. And just to underscore the point that it's highly complex, and there are many, many factors that go into what continues to feed the conflict and how one might move out of it. It also proves the point that it's also quite local. It's quite local and specific. And so, for example, in Ramadi, where we have been working to prepare a negotiation, working with stakeholders, what do they care most about? They care about they haven't had a voice in their government, they don't feel secure, and they don't trust what is a highly factionalized security landscape with each group having their own armed forces. They also want to have more control over their local government, this decentralization agenda. If you go to Nigeria, where I was 3 weeks ago, you have almost the same set of issues, but in the local context of what's going on in the religious, tribal, governmental landscape there. And so I would underscore that, one, we need to understand the forces of violent extremism, not just at the national or international level, but at a community level, at a provincial level. What are the forces that cause people to either be resilient or cause them to be susceptible when a violent ideology harnesses those local grievances?
And I think we're hearing that frustration and pain from Nada's description.
That's right.
And even though you've been part of the government, you seem to be very skeptical that your government will do anything for at least the Sunni population, as far as you've seen on the ground right now.
I think now it's time we have to invest in women and youth in Iraq. Because this is very important. 2003 till this moment, and you know, in Iraq, women they have their history, and they have their role before.
So I remember Iraq under Saddam, that there was the highest number per capita of educated women and women employed in the workforce, including in high levels in Iraqi bureaucracy. All of this under Saddam. I also remember walking in the streets and not seeing many women veiled. As the war went on, I saw more veils, more women staying in the home. Why has that changed?
Because of violence, illiteracy. Iraq, among late 70s, among the countries who eradicate illiteracy out of Iraq. Now, illiteracy among girls, you find it like in some area, like 60% of the girls are illiterate. And this is very, very dangerous. Severe violence in the country for years and years and become accumulative. You know, all these things make this regression in women.
Okay, they're trapped in the home, so their possibilities narrow.
Yes.
I saw a question in the back, right there.
Hi, I'm Steve Erlanger from the New York Times. First, to thank all three of you for a very important panel that's actually digging down into something real. And I just wanted to ask whether you think the Maliki government, through its sectarian actions, has brought Iraq to the stage where it's impossible to pull it back together again.
Yeah. Is it permanently divided?
Well, it is all, after 2003, all the procedures, and starting from the constitution till Al-Maliki government, till this government, the shape of the government, that it should be Sunni, Shi'i, Kurd, like this, that the country reached to this point, it looked like the country, it might fall apart now. But if we are going to leave things like it is, by slow thinking, and because of some of, they said it is a democratic process in a corrupted country. This is one. You have no borders in Iraq because of the action of ISIS and the interference from Iran, interference of Turkey in the north because of the PKK and all these things. And how you can run a democratic process in a country in this shape, this is one. The sovereignty of the country. Why we leave, I am a doctor, why we should leave our patient to die? We can do many things before this making the country falling apart. I think it is time now. It's a very good time that all we work together for the best of the country, and maybe changing the rule of administrative rule of the government in the country, change the shape in a way it serves everybody inside Iraq.
So sorry, go ahead.
Well, I would just say to that, no, I don't think it's impossible. And I think that Abadi is trying hard to implement some reforms. It may not be the most adept politician, and there are many, many forces at work that make the avowed program of decentralization difficult to implement. He has an important and very powerful ally in Sistani, and the street with whom he's tried to ally. But there are so many of these other complexities in deep corruption, a need for the Sunnis to become more organized so that they can be at the table with the more organized Shia and Kurds. I mean, it will take a long time, but it will not be impossible. And we need to ensure that we continue to help support the government at every level to become more decentralized, and watch how the forces of the regional power brokering play out. I mean, he's trying very hard not to be beholden to Iran right now.
And of course, every time he does try to make a move to implement some of these reforms, he's accused of being an American stooge and has to strike the balance to keep his coalition together.
That's right.
So you see this sort of stop, start, stop, start. I think we had time for one more question.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Rana Birdan Çorbacıoğlu, coming from Istanbul Women Foreign Policy Initiative. My question is, first, I would like to thank you to German Marshall Fund and to having 3 women on the stage and talking about the security and changing security paradigm. I have to mention this loudly. Second, I have to ask, I want to ask that what can be done more and to include more women in reconciliation process, and especially in regional wide. And we do have facing the same problems in Turkey, in Iraq, to some extent in Iran, having the restriction, women's rights restriction. So what can be done more in terms of having a reliable solution in the short period or in the long period?
So
I know that it's a very difficult question, but I think without women on the table, it will be not possible to reach a solution.
I think that's a great thought to be ending on. Having more women involved in the process, are we better at coming up with solutions rather than holding grudges? Sorry, guys.
I would just note that USIP works with women in many of these communities, particularly to bring them into dialogue with local security forces. Because if you're looking at how do you enable a community to be more resilient to violent extremism at the local level, there needs to be mutual understanding and ways to share information at the local level. So and confidence, which is not always possible, that the security forces are there for the benefit of the community. You need to couple that often, depending on the situation, with security reform. But it's that lack of confidence that security is there that can be a huge inhibition to women being involved with the conversation or for enabling them to keep their
capacity of women and civil society work. And we have to lobby. This is from my experience. And push so hard. And always ask. And Security Council 1325, we have to work a lot in this issue. And at the time, the politicians are very busy dividing their power and also busy by their problems. We went to the civil society work in the streets everywhere. And then you find yourself that there is a lot of people with you, and you leave maybe a leader alone, a man leader, lonely. And this is, here is the key. And I think civil society work can change the political map of any area. Like in my country, if we go to a transparent election, and by this work you can change the map, the political map of the country. But always remember, you have always to ask and lobby and raise your voice high for your rights.
I think we've just met someone who can change that political map here on the stage, and someone else helping to bridge the two sides. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to echo my thanks and what many of you in the audience have said of what a terrific panel this has been. We have a coffee break now. I want you to stay in your seats, though, for one extra minute because Nick Gowing has got some administrative things to go over with you.
Not quite administrative. I just want to encourage you to think that the last session at 12:45 is about you as well. It's about a conversation to work out what the themes are emerging in the last 2 days. It's been called an epilogue, which suggests a closure. Actually, it's more a takeoff, an envoi, or a takeaway. So please have some thoughts. Robert Kaplan will be here as well. And if you've got some suggestions, do use the app, because they can contribute as well. It's only 30 minutes, but there's a lot to get through. And we want to get a sense of where the themes are emerging from this very rich set of dialogues we've had in the last 2 days. Enjoy coffee.